Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election, specifically in the state of Pennsylvania, talking about the primary results and specifically what it means for both these candidates. And in this video, I'll be talking, just to be broad and clear here, but why I think that this was not a good performance for Donald Trump. This primary, I think, was worse for him than I would have expected in terms of both turnout and just the percentage of the vote that he got against Nikki Haley. So with that being said, I do just want to say, I know Let's Talk Elections did a video about this that came out, I think, yesterday. And good for him. I didn't watch it, unfortunately. I didn't have the time to watch it. But I think based on the title, he had a similar takeaway as I'm going to have. Please know that I'm not copying him. I meant to record. I recorded this like 3 times, like over a day ago, and my microphone wasn't working. So I wasted like 45 minutes of my life doing that. But regardless, the show must go on, and even though LTE beat me to it, I'm just going to be talking about this primary again and giving my take on it. So if you saw his video, good, but maybe I'll have a bit of a different spin on it. But regardless, the overall takeaway is the same. I think that this was a bad night for Trump. Pennsylvania is an important state. It's a state that I really think whoever wins will have like an 80 to 90% chance of winning the election. In 2020, it was functionally the tipping point. It was the most important state in the country. And Donald Trump has significantly fewer paths to victory in Pennsylvania than Joe Biden has. And that doesn't, I'm not saying that to indicate that I think Trump is, a pretty substantial underdog here. This is a toss-up type of state. But I do believe that you can draw significantly more scenarios where Trump loses Pennsylvania than Biden loses Pennsylvania, because Republicans have not won Pennsylvania that much federally since 2016. In fact, they haven't actually done so since Trump and Toomey both won in 2016. Since then, they've been 0-2 in Senate races and 0-1 in presidential races. So, and by the way, those Senate races have come by Democrats have won both those Senate races by significant amounts, and Joe Biden won the presidency by a point. So we've seen narrow victories for Democrats. We've also seen not so narrow victories. Whereas Republicans, whether they win Pennsylvania at the local level or federally like in 2016, it is close. Donald Trump won Pennsylvania by 1% in 2016. So the races tend to be closer. The paths to victories tend to be smaller for Republicans, and they can't. And for that reason, that there's a smaller margin of error. Nikki Haley dropped out of this race 7 weeks ago, got 160,000 votes in a state that Trump lost by 80,000 in 2020. So 160,000 in a state as close as Pennsylvania is significant, and Haley got that. And by the way, this was a closed primary, so these were all registered Republicans voting, and they voted, and 160,000 have voted for Nikki Haley, despite the fact that she's been out of this race for 7 weeks. Now, the counter argument to that is, well, in 2020, if you look at the Democratic primary, Joe Biden got, actually less of the vote, or Bernie Sanders got 18% of the vote, which is more than Nikki Haley. She got 17, and Biden still won Pennsylvania, and that's true. And again, this was after Bernie Sanders dropped out too. Bernie Sanders dropped out in April. This was in June. So that's definitely a fair point. My counter to that would be this primary on your screen right now, the Biden versus Sanders 2020 primary, was significantly more competitive than this primary ever was. Donald Trump has been functionally the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party for months now, and he's really been favored to win this primary from day one. But even if you were a DeSantis believer in the beginning, he's been favored to win this primary since the summer. And Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, a lot of people thought he had the primary won in February after he won Nevada and New Hampshire and did well enough in Iowa. So just to be clear here, I understand the notion of saying, well, Biden had a similar thing happen to him. The difference is that primary was actually competitive, and there were a lot more emotions invested in the Sanders campaign than there were really ever in the Haley campaign, because Nikki Haley never had anywhere close to as high of a chance of winning her party's nomination as Bernie Sanders did. And another thing to remember is that Joe Biden was not the incumbent in 2020. Now, Trump isn't the incumbent now, but he's the closest thing that you can have to an incumbent without actually being one. Like, he's an 80% incumbent. He's a pseudo-incumbent, I guess you could say. So I would definitely argue that a lot of these things, a lot of the arguments you can make in favor of this actually being a fine result for Trump, to me, don't hold up when you think about it logically. Like, yeah, tangibly, this isn't like anything bad if you're not an incumbent. But when you think about it through the lens of the fact that this has never been a competitive primary, and the fact that Donald Trump has basically been the presumptive nominee for months now, and he's basically an incumbent too, those things put it in perspective, and they don't make it look good for him. Another thing that's important here is to look at where Haley's votes are coming from. As you might expect, they're in the suburbs. Chester County, 25% there, 25% in Montgomery, 19% in Bucks, 23% in Delaware, 20% in Lancaster, and then 18% in Philadelphia. So we know for a fact Nikki Haley is doing better in the Philadelphia color. Go to a rural county like Clinton County, she's 10% there, 11% in Lycoming, 11% in Elk. She's in the single digits down here in some of these, super Trumpy areas like Bedford and Fulton. She also did okay in Allegheny, got 19% there. And then in Erie, she actually did really well, 20% of the vote there. I was really surprised she actually got that because this is a Trump county from 2016 that, has really zoomed towards Republicans since Trump has been the nominee. So I'm going to definitely argue that this was just a really strange result for Trump there, just really not good. But the Philadelphia caller, it's a swingy area. In 2020, we saw Biden do really well in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and that's what bailed him out statewide because he did not do well in rural areas, or he didn't really do that well with working class voters, at least compared to what people were expecting him to do. And he did really well in the Philly suburbs, and that's why he won statewide. And so this is another sign that Trump's going to continue to slide in the suburbs the same way Doug Mastriano did, in November of 2022, where despite people anticipating that it couldn't get any worse for Republicans, it got worse by a lot. Now, Mastriano lost by 15 points statewide. There's no way Trump's going to lose by that much, if he even does lose in Pennsylvania. But there's room for Republicans to fall, and the fact that registered Republicans in these counties are voting against Donald Trump, voting for Nikki Haley, not a good sign for Trump when there are already doubts that exist there. Now, talk a little bit about Biden in his primary. He didn't have a slam dunk night. He didn't do anything special here. 88% of the vote as an incumbent, officially an incumbent, I think is fine. Barack Obama in 2012, which was the last time an incumbent Democrat won re-election, Barack Obama in 2012 really had some subpar performances as well. I don't recall exactly how well. Actually, maybe we can look at 2012 if we go to, or no, I don't think there was one in 2012. That's why I wasn't remembering anything. But Barack Obama in 2012 had some subpar performances in states where he got a lot less than 88% of the vote, and he ended up being fine. Obviously, different time, different situation, but I think 88% is okay. If I'm Biden, I would have liked to get 90 and to call it a successful night, but 88% is fine. Now, to talk about the two other votes, which are for Phillips and write-ins, I think they're totally different. I think the write-ins are likely progressive Democrats, maybe people writing in ceasefire now or something like Free Palestine, because, again, there's been a protest movement within the Democratic Party to protest Biden's foreign policy by writing in or voting uncommitted. Pennsylvania doesn't have an option for uncommitted the way there was in, say, Michigan. That's why we got, I think, a good amount of people writing in things like maybe slogans in favor of the Palestinian cause, or people on the left who support that. And this actually corroborates, if you look at the map, like the more progressive areas of the state, like Philadelphia, it was pretty big there, 10% of the vote there, ahead of its 6% statewide total. College Town, Center County, which is kind of half college, half rural, it did all right there. And then Allegheny, 8% there, ahead of its statewide total. And then you look at areas that are more liberal or more moderate, you might expect Biden to be stronger, like Chester County, the suburbs, 3% there, 4% there, and then 3% in Bucks County. So I believe these are likely progressive voters writing in. Now, Dean Phillips got 69,000 votes, which is certainly not great for Biden. 69,000 votes in state he only won by 80,000 last time isn't great. But again, when you look at where these votes are coming from, I think it's a bit less concerning. Rural areas in Pennsylvania were stronger for Phillips. Like he got 15% in Elk County, just a rural county. That Trump is gonna win by a million points in November, like he did last time. And I bet that a lot of these 278 Dean Phillips voters are probably just people who voted for Trump in 2016 and 2020, but are still registered Democrats because they're ancestral Democrats. Again, we know this to be true in a lot of states, especially in the East Coast and Appalachia, like West Virginia, Ohio, parts of Kentucky, and parts of Pennsylvania. People are registered Democrats, but they haven't voted Democrat federally in 16, 20 years maybe. Like these people might have last voted for Al Gore in 2000, the last time they were voting Democrat. So again, that's not maybe all the Dean Phillips voters in rural Pennsylvania, but if they're voting for Dean Phillips and they're not writing in something that's more progressive, I would bet they're protesting Biden. Like Dean Phillips won a county in Oklahoma. Doesn't that mean that there's like this movement in Oklahoma for Dean Phillips? No, it just means that there are still people who are registered Democrats who really don't like Biden and voted for Trump last time are going to vote for him again. So that's what I think you can chalk a lot of this up to. Obviously, Phillips getting 2,000 votes in Delaware and then 9,000 in Philadelphia isn't great for Biden. I think those are actually more concerning because they're actually Democratic areas. But considering he did best in rural areas, that to me doesn't say a ton about what we can expect the election to look like. So this, I'd say, is okay for Biden. This, I would say, is subpar for Trump. And to go back to compare that to 2020, the last time Trump was on the ballot in Pennsylvania, he got more votes than he did this time, which is really just, to me, not good at all. Republicans combined for 1.1 million votes in 2020 in the primary. They combined for less than 1 million this time. And now I want to talk a little bit about turnout, because this is another thing that, to me, really, really surprised me. So in 2020, Democrats had a competitive primary, so they obviously outvoted Republicans by nearly 400,000. But in 2022, Republicans actually outvoted Democrats by, I think, 30 or 40,000. They won the primary vote 51% to 49%. I remember that. I don't know the exact margin of votes that they won by, but it was in the mid 10, mid like 20, 30, 40,000. We saw a swing back to Democrats. They're going to end up, when it's all said and done, they're going to end up outvoting Republicans by around 125, 130,000. So they're doing, at a minimum, 150,000 votes better than they were in 2022, and they ended up winning Pennsylvania 2022 with both Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman. They're doing 250,000 votes worse than 2020, give or take. But in 2020, the circumstances were different, and Democrats across the nation have been really just not having good primary turnout, which is expected because they have a less competitive race at the presidential level for their nomination. But, to be completely honest, I think this was an underratedly bad result for Republicans. Because, again, if you compare it to 2020, you could say it's a swing in their direction, but the better comparison is 2022. And they have lost votes since then. And more importantly, they should have, just think of it logically, they should have won the primary turn in Pennsylvania. Because Haley versus Trump is not competitive, but it's more competitive than Biden versus basically nobody. So, yeah, that is not a promising sign for Trump. And then the last thing I want to say before I kind of wrap it up here is that in 2020, and I kind of touched on this a little bit, like in 2020, the Republicans combined for over 1 million votes, right? In Pennsylvania. And they didn't really come close to that in 2024. And I'm wondering what that has to do, or why that is. Because this, the Haley versus Trump primary isn't competitive, but it's more competitive than Trump versus Bill Weld. But this is like a Biden versus Dean Phillips type of primary that was never really competitive. This primary, at least, I'm not going to say it's competitive, but it was at least an open primary with Trump as the unofficial incumbent. At least he wasn't officially the incumbent, right? So there's a difference there, and there's still less votes. So I just really look at these numbers, and the more I think about them, the worse it gets for Trump. And I'm not going to say I have a definitive take with Pennsylvania after seeing this, but if I'm Biden, I think these numbers make me feel a bit better within this state. And Trump's going to have to get both his turnout up, and remember that he's going to have to win 70 to 80% of these Nikki Haley voters to win in November, because he lost state by 80,000, and he's already trying to make up ground. If he's losing half these Nikki Haley voters even, then he's in considerable trouble. So, again, let me know what you think about this state. Let me know who you think is going to win Pennsylvania, and of course, let me know what you want to see next. So with that, I'll see you all in the next video.